Outspeak brave Horatius, the captain of the gate. To every man upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds for the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his gods?
Tentatively pushing open the door, Marisol's eyes took in a dimly lit room replete with tastefully furnished sofas and deep leather armchairs, all strategically arranged to provide an environment suitable for easy conversation. A fire laid prepared and ready for use, however, it was much too warm. Many of the walls were lined with bookshelves laden with a vast arrangement of assorted tomes. A casual glance revealed the majority to be works of fiction, interspaced with a variety of reference material. As far as Marisol was concerned, the solarium could really be more of a library than anything else. The Paradox CEO, Hurton, and Bella beamed with pride as they took the creators and creations on a short tour of the solarium. They were stalling for a little extra time while work crews made the final preparations for today's crucial moment. Vetu and Akira looked at each other sheepishly when a moderator glared at them from behind his desk. When the tour ended, Emily plucked a book off the shelf and sat down to read while she waited. She, like most of the creations, was ready to go home. Emily, Varian, Cassandra, Trig, Tenna, Callie, and Toa Mami were all carrying small drawstring bags, holding souvenirs from the real world. Marisol sat down in one of the leather armchairs and opened her own backpack. Inside was her laptop computer. Blake had brought his own, but he would not be doing much typing today, as he was still recovering from his injuries. The creators and creations spent a final, quiet moment in the library together. Emily flipped through the book she found. Cassandra nibbled on snacks. Trig and Tenna retreated into a far corner and started making out in the intense way teenagers do. Toa Mami, Vetu, Mira, and Sebakira held a hushed conversation in Partogan. Mina and Kiri sat down on a sofa and held each other silently. Callie, Dak, and Mocha stood in the doorway, watching Hurton nervously as he spoke with Paradox employees. Ushka and Conti dealt with their anxiety by pacing the room. Jericho sat on the floor, allowing Aisling to twist her long, blue hair. Lorcan, the young translator hired by Paradox, stepped into the library and loudly cleared his throat. Ahem. Everyone, it's time. At the far end of the solarium, the supernatural tunnel that normally led to the bar had been repurposed into an inferior copy of the broken gate on Rothelman Island. Marisol gasped at the sight of the light stones embedded into the wall. I took them from the gate on Rothelman, Jericho explained. Now remember what I said. Trig and Tenna will have to be the last ones through. I've implanted the idea in their minds, and they understand what they have to do. Marisol and Blake nodded. Hurton and Bella gestured to a folding table set up next to the replica gate. The two creations set up their laptops, but did not sit in the folding chairs provided. I've grown to love all of you, Blake said, and I can explain how I know. Akira raised her hand and interrupted. Love is when it hurts to say goodbye, she said. Think that's something you've said before. The assembled creations nodded their heads in assent. You really put a bit of your soul into these people, didn't you? Marisol said, prodding Blake in the ribs. I guess I did, Blake replied. Then he addressed the creations. Marisol and I made a promise, and we're going to keep it. Those of you who are taking souvenirs will change your stories to make sure those things exist when you get there. And those of you who want to make requests, Marisol has agreed to help me fulfill them. The creations broke into 2 lines. Those who wanted to make a story request from Blake, and those who wanted a story request from Marisol. Using Conti as a telepathic interpreter, Trig and Tenna went first. The youngsters say, "We got separated at the end of our story. Will you please reunite us as soon as possible?" Conti said. "I will," Marisol replied. "Promise." Varian made a request of Blake. "I really don't like being internally torn about my gender identity. I know what I am, and I know who I am," he, or she, said in a strong tone. "Damn right you do," Blake responded. "Step back into your story, and I'll make sure you are always Victoria from here on out. Hand over my heart. Promise." Sebakira wanted to have an easier time understanding the random visions of the future she would occasionally have in Faith in Chaos. Akira wanted to go to an alternate timeline and retire from being a villain. Conti wanted a team of friends and allies who would help her find the new Vanian homeworld. "Dibs," Marisol said. "I want to make some friends for Conti." "You take Conti, and I'll deal with Emily," Blake said with a smile. Conti was so happy that she hid her face so that no one would see her cry. Emily held up the book she had taken from the library. It was a children's fantasy novel called The Legend of Holly Claus by Brittany Ryan. "Bella told me that in the game I come from, Stardew Valley, the player can have children with their spouse," Emily said, blushing. "Can I take this book with me? Someday I'll have a kid with my version of Blake, and I think this would be the perfect bedtime story for them." "I read that book when I was a kid. It's a beautiful story," Blake said. "Of course you can take it. I'll give the Paradox guy some money to make up for it." Out of the corner of her eye, Marisol saw Hurton shake his head and whisper, "Dude, forget the money. Just let her have it." Callie asked for caffeinated drinks, coffee specifically, to be written into her world. Mocha asked for works of fiction to exist in a large scale. "I want books and movies and TV shows and video games," Mocha said. Dak asked for saunas to be written into his world. Ushka asked to be given a backstory. "I know I'm an unfinished character," the Water Witch said, speaking through the interpreter. "For now, a complete sense of self is what I want. If someone asks who I am, I want to be able to tell them my own story." "I've got you," Marisol told her. "Don't worry." Vetu knew that her story was full of violence and traumatic events, so she asked for something practical. "I didn't know much about my own psionic powers when Malum pulled me into the real world," Vetu said. "I want to know more about what I can do. My abilities, my powers, I would have an easier time saving my people if I knew more." "I understand," Blake said. "When you get back to your own story, you better be ready for a training arc. Your patron, the goddess of fire Mahuika, is going to be waiting for you." Cassandra asked for the thing everyone was thinking about. "Food! Just for the love of Jericho, let us eat something with a description once in a while, okay?" Everyone laughed. Jericho shook her head. "I will never get used to people using my name like that," Jericho said. Toa Mami wanted an alternate ending to her own story, one in which she was not tricked into killing her friend Nia. Akira, the person who set up said trick, put her hands on her hips and chastised herself. "That's fair," Akira said. "I think out of all the things I did when I was a villain, tricking people into killing each other was definitely one of the most heinous." Mira confessed to being slightly jealous of the other main protagonists from the Stormbreaker universe. "I'm the only hero from that story who never fell in love," Mira said. "Can I get a love interest? Hell, I'll take a brief fling. Anything, please." Marisol's heart thundered so hard it could have burst out of her chest. "Leave it to me," Marisol said, a little louder than she meant to. Jericho's request was simple. "Write the broken gates out of existence," she said. "Close that door and make sure it never opens again." Kiri and Mina had the same request. It caught Blake and Marisol off guard. "We want to become creators," Kiri said. "Like you. We want to make our own stories." "Please," Mina said, holding her boyfriend's arm tightly. "Can you give us the power of creation in our story?" Marisol and Blake smiled. "You don't need magic to create, just passion and practice," Marisol said. "I can see it now," Blake said. "After the Galactic Cold War ends, retired spies Kiri Ranjanui and Mina Soban Ray will write spy thrillers inspired by their own missions deep behind enemy lines. They get popular, and filmmakers will seek them out." "Ooh, I love this," Marisol said. "You and I are going to have to tag team this one." This left just Aisling. The fairy reached out and took Marisol's hands. They stared at each other in the eyes for the moment. Then, to everyone's surprise, Aisling spoke in slow, halting English. I want to go home. I miss Dermot." Then Aisling reached into her pocket and produced a scrap of paper. Looking down, Marisol read, "Thank you." Aisling's handwriting was terrible, comparable to that of a kindergarten student, but she had written 2 legible words in the English language. "I'll be damned," Hurton said. "Did she learn to do that on her own? Without any help from the two of you?" He pointed at Blake and Marisol. "Seems that way," Blake said. "She had help," Cassandra said. "Nanites and psionics are good for more things than combat, Blake. Get creative enough, and they can be teaching aids." "You know, Marisol, this means we have to make Aisling literate when she gets back to her story," Blake commented. Aisling smiled at Marisol, who reached across the table and pulled her into a tight hug. "I love you, Aisling," Marisol whispered. "Love Marisol," Aisling replied in broken English. "Miss you." Not only did the creations have to say goodbye to their creators, they had to say goodbye to each other. Varian and Cassandra promised they would try to find each other again. Vetu and Toamami hugged. Mira and Jericho shared a few final words. Sebakira and Aisling touched noses. Akira shook hands with Callie. Emily offered Yoba's blessing to Kiri and Mina. Dak chastised Mocha for asking Kanti for one of her white tail feathers, only to be surprised when Kanti obliged. Trig and Tenna made sure to hug everybody one last time. Then the departures began. Trig and Tenna stood next to the improvised gate, holding the reality perforator between them. Tenna put her free hand directly onto the gate, channeling her own power, Trig's power, and the power of the reality perforator into the structure. Blake had one final message for his creations. "I'm going to keep making challenges and dangers for most of you. Promise me you'll do your best to overcome whatever I throw in your way." "Of course we will," Callie said. "After all, we are not alone." Callie, Kiri, Emily, Varian, Cassandra, Mocha, Mira, Dak, and Jericho all said together. All of the creations from the Stormbreaker universe went first. Sebakira, Kanti, Varian, Mina, Kiri, Akira, Cassandra, Vetu, Toamami, Mira, and Jericho filed through the gate in pairs of 2. Most of them looked back at least once before stepping through the arch and vanishing into nothingness. Jericho and Akira both stopped and turned around. Akira bent forward in a Japanese bow, while Jericho raised her hand in salute. Then they both stepped backwards and vanished. Callie, Mocha, and Dak were next. "Thank you, Blake," Callie said. "The past year has been the most incredible of my life. I don't care if there was a million other ways these events could have played out. I wouldn't have it any other way." Standing between her husband and sister-in-law, the family of protagonists stepped through the gate and vanished. Ushka went next. Just before she reached the gate, she turned around and hugged Aisling one last time. Aisling held her tightly, stroking her hair. The two spoke in Irish for a few moments. When they pulled apart, Ushka and Aisling were crying. Then Ushka waved at her creator, said something in Irish with a cheerful tone of voice, and ran through the gate, disappearing in an instant. Lorcan leaned toward Blake. "She said, 'I know.'" Blake cut him off. Marisol noticed that Blake was starting to lose his composure. Emily clutched her Christmas book close to her chest. "I said it before, but you're really close to my version of Blake," she said. "This is a special moment. Every moment has a unique and precious beauty. It can be easy to forget sometimes." "You're right," Blake said. "But this is a moment I won't forget. When you get back to Solitaire Farm, scratch the dog behind the ears for me." "Of course," Emily said. "Goodbye." She stepped backwards through the gateway and vanished. Aside from Trig and Tenna, who would close the gate, only Aisling remained. The fairy gestured at her creators, non-verbally asking for a hug. Marisol and Blake both embraced her. "Not alone," Aisling said, repeating the mantra she heard the other creators using. "You are not alone," Marisol told her. "Go find Dermot." "Dermot," Aisling repeated. When she let go of her creators, Marisol and Blake looked at Aisling the way parents look to a child who is going off to college. Aisling held her drawstring backpack tightly as she approached the gate. "You are not alone," Aisling said. Then, without looking back, Aisling took a deep breath and strode purposefully into the gate. She was gone. Trig and Tenna looked around the room, checking for any more creations. Satisfied they were the last ones, the two protagonists approached the gate, and then turned around to face their creators and the Paradox employees. Hurton nodded. Blake leaned over and whispered into Marisol's ear. "Jericho said that only Trig and Tenna can do this. Song of the Solitaire characters can set up delayed psionic actions." "Oh," Marisol breathed. She understood. Trig and Tenna took a deep breath. Still holding the perforator between them, they reached up with their free hands and touched the archway on either side of the gate. The light stones embedded in the surface flickered before returning to their normal brightness. Then Trig nodded at Tenna. She nodded back. "Goodbye, Blake," Tenna spoke in fractured English. "Goodbye, Marisol," Trig said in equally poor English. Trig and Tenna stepped backwards. They vanished, and so did the reality perforator. The very next instant, all of the light stones went out, and the improvised dimensional gate, the bridge between the fictional and real worlds, closed forever.
And joy shall overtake us. Everything that is good and divine, truth and peace and love will shine. For every night upon this earth, death cometh soon or late. And how can man die better than facing fearful odds? For the ashes of his fathers and the temples of his God.